All right, so can everybody hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Perfect. So obviously I'm John Beegler, Shield Roofing. We are primarily focused on commercial, or what most people call flat roofing. But that's not all we do. We also do any shingle roofs as well. So roofing is not something most people would find a super interesting topic, but thankfully Josh said I can talk all night long. So, I'll try to keep it fairly short. I tried to put a few kind of small topics together that are of interest to real estate investors. So I'll kind of go through that. If you have any questions, just feel free to speak up, and we'll see if we can answer them. So the first thing I want to touch on is some changes that are happening in the insurance industry right now. The most roofs in Nebraska, they get paid for by the insurance companies, and that's when people replace their roof. So there are some changes that are impacting the way the future looks with that. First and foremost, something a lot of you guys have probably noticed: higher premiums. I don't know about you, my house premium went up, it almost doubled this year. And that's not specific to any particular insurance company, that's most insurance companies right now. They're paying out so many losses for hail claims, hurricane claims, fire claims. I guess they're getting kind of sick of it. So, another thing is higher deductibles. So it used to be pretty common, the $1,000 deductible. That's pretty much a thing of the past at this point. It used to be $500, $1,000, $1,500. Now pretty much every deductible we see is a 1% deductible or a 2% deductible. So that means if you have a $200,000 house, your deductible is going to be $2,000 to $4,000. Obviously, that impacts your choices when it comes to filing claims and replacing those roofs, especially if the storm is not as severe as some other storms. Another big thing, actual cash value policies. So for those who are more familiar with the insurance world, they have two terms for policies: replacement cost and actual cash value. When it comes to replacement cost, that's what most of us are familiar with. Actual cash value means that at the time the storm happens and you file a claim, they're going to pay you for the current value of the property. Now, not all policies are going to actual cash value, and it's not always the whole policy. But what's becoming very prevalent is that after 10 or 15 years, the roof itself will only be cash value on your insurance policy. So with that, in reality, what that means is now you have a $4,000 deductible and your policy is actual cash value. If your roof is 15 years old, you might only get $4,000 from your insurance company. So it can make a pretty big difference. If you do have older roofs, I would check with your agent and make sure that they're not on an actual cash value policy. Third thing, as far as the insurance goes, marring and cosmetic damage exclusions. So this is one of the main things we use on old roofs to get insurance companies to pay for them. Basically what that is you have all these metal accessories on your roof. You've got valley metal, your vents, all that, the pipe boots, all of that. On a lot of the new policies, they're saying that hail dents in that metal is not damage. It's not considered damage. And while that's kind of true, right? It's not necessarily damaging it. On the old policies, we could go and say you had really old shingles, we could get them to pay for the roof because that pipe boot was damaged and now we can't do repairs. So if you have that exclusion, you're not going to be able to get those kinds of like gray areas paid for anymore. And not necessarily that we're trying to take advantage of them or whatever, but that's the way they wrote the policies. They charge the premiums like that's the way they wrote the policies. So we took advantage of them the way you were supposed to. What can we do to combat that? So if insurance companies, long story short, insurance companies are not going to be paying our roofs in 10 or 15 years, the way it's looking right now. Owners, if you are planning on owning a property for a long, extended period of time, you need to plan and budget for that roof replacement. Roofing is one of the most expensive parts of your property. One way to help decrease your risk and your exposure on that is to look at warranties. So we'll talk a little bit about how warranties are structured with manufacturers. So if you talk to any roofer and you ask them what the warranty is on their shingles, they're going to tell you it's a limited lifetime warranty. And what that really means, it's a 50-year warranty. That's the warranty period on it. And then there's a prorated time and a non-prorated time. The non-prorated time is really where you're covered. And what that means is basically for that non-prorated period, they're going to cover the entirety of the roof if there's a defect on the roof. And defects can be like the wind blew a shingle off, that's a defect. They're pretty broad on what's a defect. So any damage from wind, the granules falling off, discoloration, stuff like that, those are manufacturing defects. So if you have that coverage with your insurance or with your manufacturer claim, you're covered for pretty much anything for that time period except for like a tornado hits it, or, like hail hits it, stuff like that. So what's happening is everybody's getting impact resistant shingles, and rightfully so. It's less likely to be damaged. You get insurance discounts, it just makes sense to do it. But now your shingles are not getting damaged, the insurance wants to pay less money, so in the end, you're gonna end up paying for your roof, which is probably the way it should work, but what we can do, when we're talking about that warranty term, we talk about it being 50-year or limited lifetime. The non-prorated period is normally 10 years. So on almost every shingle, there's some that'll be 5 years, or some be 10, and some that are 15. But pretty much 90% of the shingles, when they say it's a 50-year shingle, you're covered 100% for 10 years for defects. You can upgrade your warranties. They're not super expensive when you put the roof on. Like, I mean, we're talking like $100 or $200. You can double that period. We're doing that, and you can go 20-year or 30-year for the non-prorated period instead of 10 years. Every shield roof has a 20-year non-prorated period on it. You still have the option to go to 30 years if you want. Again, it might be another $100. So that's something you can weigh whether you're going to own the property or not for that long. And those warranties are they are transferable if you decide to sell the property. Who here owns a flat roof? Mark? All right, not a lot, but a few. On flat roofs, the warranties are a lot different. The standard warranty from the manufacturer covers only the membrane. And if you know too much about flat roofs, that's like 10% of the roof. So the standard warranty really doesn't cover much, and it is prorated just like the other ones. The longest period on it is like 20 years usually for the standard roofs. So there's not a lot of coverage just straight out of the box. The thing is, with flat roofs, there's what's called a no dollar limit warranty. With a no dollar limit warranty, you have to be certified by the manufacturer to install their product. They do an inspection on every roof. They usually do a mid-roof inspection and a final inspection. And so they're not going to look at like codes or anything like that and make sure the roof is up to code. But what they're going to do is look at whatever you're installing to make sure it is actually installed the way it needs to be installed. So those warranties are so cheap. I mean, it's 1% of the cost of a roof, basically. So to not do that makes no sense. The only reason roofers don't do that is because they don't want the accountability from the manufacturer. They don't want to have to deal with actually making sure the roof got done, and they're probably not installing it to that standard. There's no other reason to do it. So if you are in the market for buying a flat roof, well, A, you can call me, but B, if you don't want to do that, just make sure your roofer is doing a dollar limit warranty on your flat roof. Yes, so how to protect yourself. The first thing I would do, if you're buying a property right now, always have a roofer, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a roofer, but somebody who has the connections with the right software, pull a storm history report. So with that, you're buying a property, maybe it has a 10-year-old roof, have that report pulled, and it's going to show maybe there's 1.5% hail 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago. So you file a claim, you get their insurance company. I hope there aren't any agents in the room hearing this. They'll hate me for this. But you get the seller's insurance company to pay for your new roof, and now you don't even have the claim on your record. You don't have any of that stuff to go against you. So it's a pretty, and there are other situations where you get them to pay for the roof. Maybe the roof's not in that bad a condition. You don't even want to necessarily replace the roof. But you still got all that money, and basically pays your down payment. That's something I personally have done. I've had roofs or I've had properties I bought where the down payment or the insurance claim that I took over on a roof that wasn't even that bad, paid for the down payment and put money in my pocket, and now I own the property. If you want to do this, I have a bunch of cards in the back. I don't charge anything to do this. I can pull this report, email it over to you. Super easy, super fast. I get over to you in about 15 minutes usually, once I see your text or whatever. But okay, the second big thing that people aren't doing near as much as they should. When you buy a property, if the roof is less than 10 years old, you should take a look at it and see if you can transfer the warranty on the roof. The manufacturer warranty that we talked about, you can transfer that warranty, but usually it's within 5 years or 10 years, depending on the manufacturer. So if the roof is newer, you probably don't have to worry about the roof for a long time. But if you transfer that warranty, you've got some coverage on it from that. So like there might be a situation, say 10 years down the road, you have a hail claim, turns out you have a high deductible. So maybe you have a $20,000 roof, $5,000 deductible, and an ACB policy. So on a $20,000 roof, maybe the insurance company pays you $10,000 in this situation. Well, that warranty claim, even though at that point it's past the non-prorate period, they might be able to pick up another $5,000 or something like that from the manufacturer, and that would help you cover the rest of that cost of the roof instead of having to come up with $10,000 out of pocket. If you want to transfer these yourself, you can. You just got to know what the shingle is and the color, and you go to the manufacturer website. There's a form you fill out. Usually there's about a $100 fee to do it. There's a lot easier way to do it. Just call me and I'll process it for $75. It's not something we make money on, but it's a service we offer. That just basically covers some of our time to do that. So, long story short, make sure your new roofs include an extended non-prorated period or an NDL warranty if they're a flat roof. That's kind of the key takeaway here. If you're doing a new roof, it just makes sense to do it, especially if you're going to own the property, or even if you're going to sell the property, that you can sell it at $100 or $200 depending on the roof. It's a pretty easy sell to somebody. Maybe that's that extra thing on a flip that now they want to buy that house. Like people are weird about stuff like that, especially like investors, not as much, but the average homeowner, especially a first-time home buyer, those little warranty things, it can kind of influence their decision a little bit. Now, who here has a phone? Come on, Nancy, have a phone. All right, so Shield Roofing is in the final round of the Lincoln's Choice Awards. Shameless plug. So if you feel so inclined, text 550-402-532-1914 to put in a vote for us. And you can do that every day if you want. Which you do want, I think. It's another drink.
Now we're going to switch it over to our speaker. I've known Nancy for probably 10 plus years, maybe 15 years. I'm not really sure. She's helped me out with so many different things over the years. Evictions, creative financing, deal structures, just general law questions I've had over the years. And so she's a wealth of knowledge. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to say tonight. So if you guys have any questions, get them ready for her. She's here. You have her attention, so let's give it up to Nancy.
I had no idea what you guys would want me to talk about. So we're going to kind of freelance this, and if you have questions, that's fine. I thought I'd start with, a lot of people know me in different ways, and they think that's what I do. They met me when I was doing something, and that's what I do. I do a lot of things, and I always have done a lot of things. I started practice in 1982 here in Lincoln when I graduated. and went to work at a small firm that did a lot of real estate work. And I was hired to do litigation and bankruptcy. And at that point in time, there weren't a lot of girls either. I was kind of the only one of those. So it evolved. I didn't really understand that I was going to be doing real estate. I don't know why I didn't understand that, because my father was an appraiser, and I grew up with people that were doing real estate all the time. We went on family vacations to farm managers and rural appraisers conferences, hung out with the bankers in Omaha that were doing real estate lending. I was working a transaction on a piece of ground I've done a lot of stuff with over the years. And my mom finally said to me the other day, you know, they wanted your dad to go in on that with them when they did it. And I'm like, you mean I could have been the seller in this transaction instead of just the lawyer doing the work? But that was how it's just, I knew the language. As I say, the language was familiar to me. I didn't necessarily know or think about real estate, but it happened. So in the 90s, I started teaching continuing education for real estate agents as a marketing technique. And so lots of real estate agents came through my classes. They see me for 3 hours. I have no idea who they are. They have listened to me for 3 hours. And so that became a real networking thing for me. And about that time, I also started doing a lot of tax-deferred exchanges, which led to really a statewide practice, because those are very specialized transactions. And if you're not going to do a lot of them, you shouldn't be messing around with them. But they're really fun, and they're really good for people in real estate because you're dealing with multiples. I had one client that traded out of all their properties in California. They had a house, and then every time they moved, they kept their old house as a rental. So they wound up with a few properties in California. The market shifted. They sold out of California and did 1031s into a portfolio here in Nebraska. 8 or 10 years later, they call me, the market's changed again. They sold here and flipped back into California. So, you know, it just led to a lot of things. So I've got the teaching. I've done a lot of community service work on different boards over the years. I was very active in the groups that have built Lincoln's bike trail system and some of the rural trails too. And that, again, led to a different set of people that know me from that kind of work. I shifted a little bit a few years ago and got out of the board work and started teaching a class at the University of Nebraska College of Business. It's a pre-licensing class, the real estate principles and practice, which I really had to think about. Do I want to teach students instead of adults? Do I want to teach people who have no idea what a real estate closing is, no idea what a mortgage is? You know, can I do that? And it's really been fun. I've really enjoyed doing it. The students like it, many of them. And now, because I think TikTok and the cable channels and all the publicity and groups like this, they are all convinced that you have to have a real estate side hustle. And that's the only way you're going to develop wealth in the world. It may be. There are other ways. I've seen people make money other ways. You've got to have a persistence, I think, if you're going to stay in real estate. This is a complex area. I can form an LLC for a restaurant, for an accountant, for an insurance company, any other kind of business. And I may talk to those people once every 10 years. But if I've got a client that I've formed a company for and they're in real estate, legal is part of your team. You need insurance, you need your subs, your roofers, your other people, you need legal, you need a banker. It's just part of your team. And I don't know why that is, but real estate does have a higher need for legal. I do a lot of landlord-tenant work. I was low man on the totem pole at the real estate firm, and so you're going to go do evictions. And I had a lot of clients that had real estate, and so I did a lot of evictions. They are not a career path for me. It's just a service that is needed. Suddenly, in the last 5 years, that has become this mystique area, and we've got all of these housing justice advocates. I was checking in at a conference, and there was a young woman and I'm signing in to get my CLE credit for being there. And she's like, do I have to sign in? And I said, not unless you need your CLE credit. And she was a law student. She looks at my name and she's like, oh my God, you're Nancy Loftis. You know, I've been involved with the Housing Justice Clinic at the law school. That's such a big deal. I'm like, this is eviction work. I mean, it's just a pretty simple area of the world, but it's commonly needed. And it has become a very political area. I don't know how many of you caught, but last week there was actually a day's debate down at the legislature over a number of landlord-tenant laws, and it surprised everybody, but they did manage to kill them. One of them would have been actually good, and that was to allow people to use email and text correspondence instead of using the regular U.S. mail for notice. But it was the first time I'd actually heard a real dialogue going on with the landlords not being the evil creatures. They were talking about the tensions and pressures and things that we see coming up in that area. And so I really did appreciate that. Whether there'll be more of it, I don't know. How long that movement will continue, I don't know. It's a pressure point, but it's a problem that is not being caused by landlords or necessarily. I think right now a big part of it is inflation. I think that the lower income levels have been hit really hard with the inflation aspects that we're dealing with, and it's put pressure on their ability to pay rent. COVID hit some of those layers a little differently. Sometimes they just have so many other problems that getting around to paying rent is way down the list. If you've got 4 or 5 kids, you've got an abusive ex-spouse, you've got little or no education, you've got health problems, you've got issues. We can't solve those problems in landlord-tenant law, but this has become a pressure point where how do we deliver services to them and keep them from being unhoused? And I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you that that's been a real problem in processing these cases, and they're taking longer. They don't feel real good to either side of it. I know my clients have complained a lot about legal fees. They've complained about the time it takes. I think that what I've seen generally, evictions are taking 2 and 3 weeks longer on average than they used to, just to get them through. And the other part of that, and this is very difficult to control, and the eviction process does not solve it, but damage claims tend to be a little higher on what I see. I always have to caveat this. I see the worst of the worst. I don't see the 95% of the tenants that are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Everything I see is on the other end of the spectrum. The problem with damage claims is that they're very rarely collectible. I saw statistics a few weeks ago. Only 17% of them ever get collected in any percentage at all. And so we get a lot of emotion going on them, and we get a lot of pressure on me that, we need to get that damage claim, we need to get that collected. What I have to deal with in terms of the rules of presenting those kinds of claims at court can be kind of tedious, and the burden of proof is going to be on the landlord. And so sometimes I have to step back and go, is this really worth all of our time? And even if we get to the point where we have a judgment, will you ever collect it? And so I'm kind of advising people to take a look at just moving those to collection services instead. They are more likely to have current information on people about where their addresses are, what their employment might be, because they're getting new claims in all the time. Utility companies, medical bills. And so it's easier for collection places to track some of these things and do the kind of tracing. I've done it. I represented GMAC for a long time when they had a Lincoln office. And so I had everybody's car loan south of the Platte. And I did a lot of skip tracing to repossess cars. And I got to where I could tell what account came from what dealership pretty quickly just by how some of these things would come out. And I got familiar with skip tracing and trying to jockey around those things. But it's tough. When you get to the point where you're trying to collect, it's really just minimizing your losses. They did change the small claims court limits last week. Starting in July, there'll be 6,000, and then a year from now, they move up to 7,500, where you can take accounts of small claims and not use lawyers. I think there's a limit on how many claims a year one party can file, but that is an option that's available. The other thing I'll say about the tenant advocacy groups, they're starting to go through the leases with a fine-tooth comb. Yes, question.
I'm assuming that the cost of evictions is going up because of the extra work you have to do. Your run-of-the-mill eviction ballpark, what is that cost on those days?
We have tried to keep things flat fee and low. And so they're generally running about $500. And I don't know how long we're going to be able to keep it there. You know, it depends on a lot of things. Some of what's happened is the tenant groups came out of COVID with some funding. We had a lot of federal dollars that were coming down to provide rent assistance and to provide services for this. That is not going to continue. And so they're attempting to develop alternate financing sources. But at this point in time, I think that's largely to keep themselves staffed. And so I don't really know. All I know is that the law school is deep in it, so they've got students for labor. Legal aid used to not get involved in evictions. They stayed out of them. They have limited resources. They've devoted their resources elsewhere. They are staffing some of the housing cases now. And the State Bar Association has some involvement in a coordinating fashion, and they're paying some staff. How long all that's going to hold together, I don't know. I know that the law school has cut way back. The Bar Association is under pressure because not all lawyers want to represent tenants or think we should be. We're trained to represent both sides. I'm trained to argue both sides of whatever we're talking about. I'm annoying that way. You know, you can't just have an argument with me because I can argue both sides of it. I mean, I can see this, I can see that. But that 500, I think, is a fair number. There's a legal issue about whether or not you should have jury trials and evictions. There was a time when we did have that. In the time that I practiced, I only had one that ever requested it. And the judge said, that's fine, you're going to have to post bond for the cost of the juries. And that was the end of that discussion. So that bill was up because there's a state constitutional issue about whether or not they should be able to have a jury trial. The fiscal note on the bill for the jury trial said the cost would be $10,000. And I'm like, no, the cost of instituting jury trials and evictions across the state is going to be significantly more than $10,000. Saline County won't have jury trials on anything now because it can't afford it. You've also got me, when we get into politics, and I do not claim to be an expert, but there's a great deal of uncertainty right now with what is going to happen to our entire tax structure. And the city council in Lincoln is highly concerned that if some of that goes through, Lincoln may be in a real economic pit, trying to figure out how we finance our city government because of what it will do to the sales tax computations. And so I'm not going to go into tax policy tonight, and I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I also recently went on the LIBA, Lincoln Independent Business Association board. I've been meeting with the committee that meets with city council people one-on-one for a couple years now. And so that group is a little more political than a lot. And so I've been, having these conversations with what do we do as a city? What should our policy be about affordable housing? How do we help with some of these problems that people are facing? And funding is always the issue. It's the same thing in yours. You can buy every property you want, but if it doesn't cash flow, we don't necessarily, or bring some intrinsic value, some benefit to it, what do we do with it? And that's always interesting. One of the funnest real estate projects I ever did was I sat on the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission to do a comprehensive plan update for all of the recreational facilities in the state. And you try to think on a statewide level, and they own a lot of real estate. This is what I would say to my students, real estate is such a broad and diverse area. How many of you do industrial? You got one industrial. How many do office? How many do retail? How many do in residential? How many do in sports? There's so many different categories in the real estate. There's profit, there's nonprofit, there's downtown. We've got an entire downtown that's got a lot of empty space in it right now that we're going to eventually figure out something to do with. I had an agent doing a sales pitch on me the other day. I don't know if she was practicing or what, but she was trying to tell me that Nebraska we don't have any ground. And I'm like, have you driven around? I mean, we have vast areas that is just empty, not in Lincoln. But I said, we've got lots of ground, but we keep it very restricted. And when we do that, what happens? Well, the price goes up. And so we get inflation that makes it hard for people to buy stuff. But what else happens when that's going on? Everybody gets real happy about how much their house is worth and what their portfolio looks like on their financial statement. So I see it cutting both ways. I don't know that this pressure on the pricing is going to ease that much, even if interest rates go down, if everything that the president was talking about in the State of the Union happens, and we start flooding more money into this again, you're going to have nothing but increased value and inflation happening, and that's been a big part of it. I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, the one thing about the market is it changes every day. I've been through so many up and down cycles because I'm not young anymore. I forget how old I am, but I've been through 4 or 5 of those cycles. It happens, but we still keep going. And as a financial advisor said to me one time, he walked into my office during that bad depression about 2010. I said, "How are things going?" He said, "Really good." And I'm like, he said, when things are bad, people finally realize that maybe they shouldn't be doing it on their own, so they come and see us. And he said, the only time you're making money is when there's movement. So if it's going up or it's going down, doesn't matter. Those are the opportunities. When I have clients that are buyers, if the market's going on a dip, well, that's the time to buy. Things are going down, but now I've got the opportunity maybe to buy something that I hadn't been able to before. And so you have to kind of look at it a little differently sometimes, or you can't. You don't have to, but that's kind of how I approach it. And again, I started in bankruptcy. It was 1982. We were deep in an ag recession. And so I've always had real estate and bankruptcy as specialties. And when the market's up, the bankruptcies are down. And when the market's down, the bankruptcies go up. I've had shopping centers in this town in bankruptcy for 10 years. I mean, you just were riding through a development phase. And things were down, but it wasn't the end of anything. So you kind of have to gauge your deal. What I see right now, again, this inflation is just a very difficult thing. You saw it on the roof issue. It's hurting the insurance side of it. It's hurting your remodels and renovations. It hurts your tenants. I think it would be really spooky right now to be starting a new business, just a brand new business. But I see it happening all the time. Does anybody have something they want me to talk about? Transaction work, LLCs? Yes, Shinda.
Can you talk about Kansas City, about me not being able to sway the tenant, the background?
Say that again?
Stacy, can you help me out? It's Kansas City, the council you cannot screen the background of the tenant for
Shinder's asking about restrictions on screening backgrounds of tenants.
like
Yes, I think that's the law that you can't use source of income, prior eviction. I can't remember all of it.
The bill that was in the legislature, one of them that got killed was what they called the Clean Slate Act that we had here. And in the debate, I think they may have slightly exaggerated how restrictive that was going to be. But the idea was we would allow tenants to block access to information about previous evictions on their record, which is kind of like saying to a bank, you know, you can't look at my credit report before you decide to give me a loan or not. The argument that I liked the best that was being made by a number of senators who actually had real estate was that some of these things, and I say the same thing with the tenant assistance program defenses, it starts out okay, and maybe it's kind of a small thing and we just are doing it, but incrementally it grows. So my incremental war that I was having this week, last Thursday I went down to do an eviction. The tenant wasn't there. So I had the hearing. We were leaving. My client goes to the elevator, sees the tenant. The tenant says, I've got my key. I can give it to you. I was in a car accident. That's why I wasn't here on time for court. My client says, go talk to the tenant assistance program people. And she comes back to get me and says, hey, the tenant is here. So we wait. And we do a settlement. Tenant represented by counsel. They wanted to do a payment plan. It wasn't acceptable. They wound up giving us the key. I think it's over. We were going to let her get back in to get stuff like we're supposed to do. Well, the law school found out about it, and they thought that it was unfair. And so they're trying to reopen the case and undo everything. And I'm not real happy about this because you're supposed to be able to make settlements. But again, it's that incremental. When you ask me $500, now I'm going to have at least one, maybe two more hearings on that case. And they're yelling that we're going to sue your landlord for wrongful ouster. And you requested attorney's fees as a part of the settlement proposal. And you can't do that legally. And this is what I started to say. They are screening your leases. If you've got a lease that says tenant pays landlord's legal fees, the Landlord-Tenant Act does not allow that. And what will happen with it? I don't know. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of leases out there that have that language in them. Okay? When I go on the damage claim, I routinely get attorney's fees. There are provisions under the Landlord-Tenant Act that allow fees to be awarded in some situations. But the lease can't say, you agree to pay my fees. Okay? It's important to review your documents. Yes?
If there's a severability clause, is that fine then, or are you seeing them fight that even if that exists?
Again, I've got them fighting a settlement right now, a settlement made with counsel that's in their own coalition. So it's aggressive. They're aggressive in selected cases. I don't know, but it's interesting to me that the facts of this case bear strong resemblance to an article that was in the paper a day or two before that about people being evicted when they had children during the school year, single moms, and there's been a lot of press coming out of Omaha because the Omaha Housing Authority has been aggressively evicting and trying to clean up their situation. And so again, you get these unrelated to the law, you get these pressures going. And there is an interest in trying to keep people who have children housed. They want to try to keep that stable if they can. But again, we're just selecting. As I said to them, I said, you don't develop policy based on one or two curated set of facts. We need a policy that says, as I put it, and of course I don't always do it as gracefully, but it's county court. high volume, rough justice. I always say I'm going to win some out of lose, and I'm going to lose some out of win, but we keep them moving, we get the disputes resolved. And so I can't just pick out one case and say, well, this one's terrible, we should do this. I mean, we need to have a policy. We need to have settlements. We can't function without them. I looked at the other landlord attorneys this morning and I said, should we just start picking one of us each day? We'll try all of our cases and just bring everything to a halt. You know, we're not going to do that. But, you know, there has to be, you have to rebalance it out. Yes.
You mentioned like financial planners up or down. It's when there's movement that they make money. Last couple of years, transaction volume has absolutely died. What are you seeing that affect your profession or the real estate investors you work with?
I don't think they've died. I go to, if you guys ever want to, there's a regional conference in Omaha. It's now they've moved it to August, the Crew Midwest. But they take longer and things slowed down. Things slowed way down. But they didn't die in all areas. And I've still had plenty of transactions, plenty of 1031s. Maybe some of them are more farms and other things. I mean, sometimes people have died. There are things that still happen, things that go on. People still find places to live. People have families. You know, that's the other thing about real estate. When you're a lawyer, people think, oh, you're a real estate lawyer. Well, yeah, I'm a real estate lawyer, but I also do evictions. Guess what? I've had a lot of clients that get divorced. The divorce lawyers like to bring me in on real estate cases because divorce lawyers don't necessarily know anything about real estate. I've actually had a couple where the people couldn't agree, and so the divorce settlement was, we're going to give Loftis a power of attorney to sell our house and pay the bill. I mean, you know, so you get family law, you get estate planning, because people that have real estate have to do the regular kinds of planning too. You've got business issues. Do I need an LLC? Hey, if we're this kind of an LLC, do the regular documents work, or do we need to be concerned about what's going on with the feds and sub-S elections with LLCs? It's a wide area. I mean, I wind up knowing a little bit about a lot of different things or happen to learn about them. And that just kind of goes with the turf on these things. Just like you buy a property, all of a sudden you got to learn about being a plumber and being a roofer and how to clean carpet. I mean, you know, who thought that would be real estate? What else? Yes.
Do you encounter a lot of 1031 exchanges in your practice, or I'm not quite for sure?
I probably do a consistent 50 or 60 a year.
Are you familiar with it's called the MISP 453 clause in the IRS tax code that allows a seller to keep 95% of their funds, and they don't have to transfer them into real estate?
No.
We need to talk. It's right out of the IRS code. It's been there since the inception of the IRS code, but it legally allows a seller to keep a large portion, 95% of their funds, and not pay tax on it for 30 years.
I've not run into that one. But you know, I'm always happy to learn. I have had some clients, you know, typically a 1031 involves selling and then purchasing replacement, or buying replacement and then selling properties to match them up, maybe one or more. I have had some clients that are doing, with particular properties, doing UPREIT transactions where they convey the property into a REIT, take back partnership interests in that REIT, and can avoid the capital gains tax in that fashion, and yield some cash money out of it too. And I've had some that are doing the same thing with a charitable angle to it as well. but yours is new to me. Somebody else had a question.
Along that line, like 1031s are used to defer, your gains. In your experience working with city government, which areas of that do you think could be reduced to save money when you were mentioning funding being an issue in the future? Like, which areas of city government do you think could be reduced or has the lowest ROI for the average property owner?
We haven't reduced city government in my lifetime. When I heard a city council person say that last week, we might have to have layoffs. It was like, I've never heard of such a thing. The American tax code or tax system is always kind of interesting. I remember one time trying to explain it to an immigrant. So I had clients that came from the Middle East, land in Nebraska, begin to live their lives, buying property. And came in, they had bought one property as a religious property and they were tax exempt for certain things, but the county assessor was refusing to exempt the entire valuation of the real estate because they had more ground than just was needed for their church. And so I'm trying to explain to somebody that has never lived in our country and came from a country where if Saddam felt like they needed more money, this guy was an engineer, they just had him go drill another oil well. That we have local, state, and national taxes that come through in different ways. There's no one answer to any of that. And I'm not going to be the one that says, I am not served in government. I know we have large bureaucracies. I've seen it particularly from a real estate angle. If you want to do something about affordable housing, relax the zoning and building codes. Right. That is adding, on an Omaha study, well done recently, within the last couple of years, 25% to the cost of any new construction home. Now, you're not going to get out of the cost of utilities. And part of the problem, our ground is expensive, is we need to extend utilities in order to develop new areas. And, Lincoln's looking at a hugely expensive project to try to develop a secondary water source. We've got all kinds of issues about alternate energy sources. And then there's always the fight. I've got one deal pending right now gets hung up in the solar disputes that happen in certain areas because people don't want a solar farm next to them. But that is an area where you could change. Omaha has begun changing in the Midtown area. They reduced a number of their parking requirements around the medical center. They just said, no, we're going to allow development. We're not going to. Lincoln's done it downtown. The downtown projects do not have to provide parking because the city built parking garages and they wanted to steer parking into that. Yet if one of you wants to build something at 42nd Pioneer, you're going to need to be providing parking, although they did just relax the shopping center requirements. But that's the kind of thing we need to see, is go through, are these things really still serving the purpose we think they should? There are biases. Anytime we get into that, there is a belief that the developers and real estate people make out like bandits and profit off of the entire, and ruin the rest of the town. And I always say, you be the one to go sign a $20 million note with no assurance that this is actually going to work. I don't see people out there intentionally building crap. I see people build things they want to be able to sell or put renters in and use, and away we go. But the land use stuff is the area where you could really see some improvement. I don't know we'll be able to get it. I always tell my students, you've got the acquisition part, you've got the financing part, you've got the construction part, you've got the property management part once you get it built. Before you can get it built, you've got the land use development part to go through. And the land use development takes the longest and is the most complicated and expensive. You've got lots of engineering fees. You've got lots of impact fees potentially. You've got a lot of review process going on at city level. It can be very political. It can be very expensive and discouraging. But that is an area where if you could start to make some progress, you might see some real impact in what it costs to bring these things online. That's just my opinion. More questions? Yes.
Could you speak just for a moment to proper establishment and structuring of LLCs, do's and don'ts?
He's asking about using LLCs to structure your business. Long ago and far, far away when I was a young lawyer, we did partnerships and corporations. And you did partnerships because they were a pass-through entity for income tax purposes. And you did corporations for other reasons. Corporations, a C Corp has to pay income tax. So it pays income tax on profits, and then if it pays its owners dividends, they get taxed again on that. So people didn't like the corporate side for real estate. It was more beneficial to own it in a partnership. The problem was, if I'm a partner in a partnership, I am individually liable for the debts of that partnership. So I remember one time when downtown Lincoln was in one of its dire slumps, and a law firm had gone broke. And one of my jobs was to research, and I knew most of the lawyers, how many of the partners in that law firm partnership were personally obligated for the next 10 years on a lease of a floor in one of the high-rise buildings, because they were personally liable. So long about the 90s, 2000s, we developed limited liability companies, which would have the attributes of a partnership for tax purposes. They could be a pass-through. And they would also have the attributes of a corporation that the individual owners would not be liable for the debts of the LLC. Since we did that, I have not formed a single partnership. There are still some around, but the limited liability companies became the popular vehicle. In addition, the IRS has since relaxed their restrictions even further. As an LLC, I can choose. Do I want to be taxed as a corporation? Do I want to be taxed as a partnership? Do I want to be a sub-S corporation? I can pick what kind of tax return I want to file. If I'm a single member LLC, just one owner, I can be disregarded for income tax purposes and just a Schedule C on their 1040. And so I would say 99.5% of the entities that I form are LLCs. I will form a nonprofit corporation to be a homeowners association or a condominium owners association to govern that. I will do nonprofit corporations for some charitable kinds of things, but by and large, we do lots of LLCs. Once in a while, I will get a company and their accountant prefers to be a particular form. I had a client one time that started a garbage company, and they had an accountant that only did garbage companies, and he had it all figured out. He had his system. They didn't use a calendar year because he didn't want to be caught in the April crush of filing tax returns. He had them spread out, filing like in August and September. And he wanted them to be a certain style of corporation. But it was just his system. Otherwise, most people I see using LLCs. The purpose of the LLC usually is to protect myself from liability of that company. Sometimes it's to keep companies separate. I don't want liabilities of my bar flipping over into my trucking company. I don't want my trucking companies flopping onto my rental properties. They're inexpensive to form. They're simple to run. There aren't a lot of fancy requirements. You don't have to have lots of officers, lots of meetings. They're very flexible. And so they've been very popular, and they've pretty much taken over. We used to go to conferences where you'd spend days. Choice of entity. Listen, people talk about which you do for this, but it's all LLCs now. Yes.
Piggybacking on that, now that Nebraska has series LLCs, are you doing those at all? Any thoughts on that?
I haven't had people that wanted that. So I haven't done, what I see that people do want that we don't have is the Delaware Statutory Trust. And those again are entities that were created to accommodate 1031 funds. And they also have a certain level of privacy associated with them that a lot of my clients are interested in. Oh, we just don't have those. I have a client, we're gonna do something kind of like that. Trying to avoid a due on sale clause to take over a low interest mortgage. I don't know if it's gonna work. But sometimes you want that disguise. Yes,
Is providing market value housing a qualifying reason for a nonprofit?
sure. Why not? You know, I've served on enough nonprofit boards to say to you that nonprofits are just as interested in making money as the for-profits. It's what are they going to do with it? They want to pay market rate salaries, they want to provide services, housing, it's fine. It's fine. But I don't know what market rate is. I mean, the reason we're getting so far into the affordable housing, we have a local administration that has made it a priority to some extent. The entire country and half the world is faced with this housing expense problem. This is not anything novel to Lincoln. And the other thing is we just don't have very many financial tools to work with developers. And one is TIF. As a friend of mine said last week, you know, it is kind of silly that we are blighting greenfields in order to allow TIF to be used for development purposes. You're taking perfectly good, viable market, cream of the crop ground, and you're blighting it so that you can use TIF to have some equity in it. Come on. We just don't have that many tools. So no, I providing market housing doesn't bother me. It could be serving, like I say, it could be resettlement, it could be all kinds of things. I worked at, it's been quite a while, but we were doing I had a client that was doing a lot of affordable housing building and kind of some novel stuff. And so we were working a project with Lincoln Action Program, and cost is always an issue in construction. And we thought we were getting there, and then the project manager in charge of it comes in, and she said, I went to some open houses up in Omaha on the Parade of Homes this week, and I think that these houses should have the same level of appliance quality as I was seeing in the high-end Omaha houses. And we're like, well, you know, we need to find a way to knock another 12,000 out of these units, not add another 7,000 or 8,000, because the numbers just aren't working. But, you know, you get into some interesting discussions philosophically on some of that stuff. But again, nonprofits are in the profit business. It's just a question of, is it going to private benefit? You know, are we serving a better cause? One of my law school classmates is general counsel for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I always think about Connie, because I say, you know, you get up in the morning and it's not, what am I going to do today and what's going to happen over at eviction court? It's, what can we do to help the Mexican situation so we don't have quite as many people that need to cross the border to come here? Let's call our friends in India and see if they've got any ideas. You know, how do we stimulate development? And there's room for all that. More questions? Yes.
Is there a certain amount of like houses or assets you should have in one LLC before you start branching them out into different ones, or does it matter?
There's no limit to how much I can have in one LLC. I can have $1 billion LLC. One of my big home builder clients one time, he had framed the, you know, when I form a corporation, I print stock certificates. You go to the office store and you get certificate paper and you print them. My sister was with me one time, I was buying that, and she says, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to print stock. And he had his stock, he had his 1 share of stock issued in his company framed on his wall. And he said, look, you did that. That was a $10 par value share. That piece of paper is worth $1 million now because he was the sole owner of his company. It gets down to the same thing that the roof guy was talking about. How are we going to manage risk in our business? Do we want everything in one, or do we want to break things up a little so that we've spread risk? I had one client that got into a lower end motel, and I said, keep that out of your other rentals. It's a different operation. They shouldn't be together. I've had other clients where we'd break things into $500 million packages and put clusters in each. The important thing, and again, it gets back to what we were talking about, it can be expensive right now, but carrying insurance is the real problem. I've had 2 instances come up in the last couple months where condominium owners had not purchased insurance on their condominium unit. The Owners Association insurance on the structure is not going to cover damage to the unit. So I had a commercial property, commercial condominium. They didn't have insurance. Their tenant didn't have insurance. There was frozen pipes. And everybody's going, well, why didn't the Owners Association insurance take care of this? Well, no, they're not. That's not their job. And there's nobody, I didn't care about the loss. There's claims both ways. So I didn't care. But I said, the problem is I need somebody to cover the cost of defense. We're all going to go litigate over this, and that's going to be $20,000, $30,000. It's probably going to wind up getting resolved in mediation somewhere. But there's nobody to carry the cost of defense. I have not seen very many catastrophic insurance claims in my career. Only a couple. One of them I actually went and watched the fire. And I don't like to go to fire, but it was a big fire. And I'm sitting in the truck with the adjuster, young adjuster, he'd never seen anything like. We're watching the fire, and watching the firemen watch the fire, right? But the real reason to have that insurance is to have the cost of defense covered. It's not to get a new roof. That's nice. But when you get involved in one of these claims, if the insurance company can take that over, even if they're not going to pay the claim, they will typically defend the case. And most of them are going to settle. Most of them are going to go to mediation and settle. It's just where we are. Yes?
What about any issues operating LLCs across state lines?
You can register them in other states.
Well, if you're set up an LLC in Nebraska and you're also operating in adjacent states, should you also open up an LLC in those other states?
You can register them. I just had this today. I had a guy from Arizona call me, needs an LLC because they're buying a commercial property. And he said, should I do a Nebraska one or should I do an Arizona one? And I said, the property's here in Nebraska. Let's do a Nebraska LLC. But we can register that same LLC in Arizona, and it can do business in Arizona. So an LLC can do business in multiple states. And it's not difficult to register an LLC in another state. The American Bar Association puts out model acts that they're not require each state to adopt, but most states will adopt that, sometimes with some differences. So the corporate and LLC filings in Iowa are very similar to what they are in Nebraska. I can get on their Secretary of State website and usually figure it out. And I've done a lot of registering, particularly when we're buying stuff in other states. The title company will want the LLC registered in that state. You can form a new one, but you do not have to. I should say the other reason to do the LLCs is if you're going to have multiple owners. Otherwise, you're doing co-owner agreements, and the LLC makes it easier to have multiple owners, to have partners in deals. More questions? Where are we?
Do you do much with zoning changes?
I've done a little bit. I've been around land use stuff my whole career. the important thing is to know what you might be able to do and meet early with the city. And it's true with any government stuff. I don't want to litigate with things that have more money than my clients do or are known by 3 letters: IRS, EPA, LES. If you get one of those and you want to have a fight with them, they have more money than we do. Banks have more money. People will call me, I want to sue the bank. I'm like, that's really not probably going to be a very good idea, because they can litigate forever and they don't care about your case. They don't want 12 other customers suing them the week after. Hey, we figured out we can do this. So my attitude with government stuff is I like to contact them first and see what they think they might need or what. And so pre-development meetings, you can get a sense. They don't try to stop everything. Where you get into the high profile stuff is when we've got a very loud opposition group. But for instance, NEBCO lost a building during the COVID riots. And they have been rebuilding that block over the last couple of years on Lincoln Mall. Pioneer Housing Co-op, the one housing co-op we have in Lincoln, is right next door to that. They're on the alley with them. Pioneer Housing Co-op was formed to provide an affordable housing place for retired teachers. So we've got lots of elderly people and lots of lower income people. And there was going to be a lot of disruption to their parking lot caused by the construction activity next door. There was a lot of concern about whether it would be safe for their building from a fire standpoint because the alley was going to be blocked off. And I had a lot of older people who tend to be kind of crabby about some of this stuff. I represented Pioneer Housing Corp, and we had a few meetings. And the smartest thing I did was I said, we want a liaison that is our contact person with you. And they looked around and they gave it to Danae Kakowski, who's their lawyer. And Danae is very responsible and reliable. And we've made it through 2.5, 3 years with maybe only a couple of dust-ups. And nobody's writing in the paper every week about how this was bad or something else. And then they'd asked at the last hurrah to have NEBCO wash their windows, and they weren't going to do that. But then they called me the other day and they said, you know what? This has gone really well. We're going to wash the windows for them. So, they don't all have to be that way. You don't hear about the ones that just go down fine. And I worried about that one. I mean, that could have been a nightmare ride for a while. But it went beautifully. And the city had forced them to give us alternate parking rather than force everybody into street parking. And that was fine. It worked out. They could deal with it. And they've now got a new tenant in the building, and things are going well. So, but I do like to kind of start. If it's an area that could be, I like to start. How are we doing it now? How do you guys want it? They'll tell you. It's government, so it's going to, I always say there's 2 speeds, slow and dead stop. I mean, things aren't going to go really quickly, but it is possible to do lots of things. You just don't always hear about them. And it can be very frustrating. Very frustrating for people. And some of it makes no sense. I mean, I've had many arguments with whether an easement really needs to run diagonally across the property, or could we go around the perimeter so that we can actually build on that. I've had meetings that surprised me that after they were done, it got worked out. Sometimes you just have to be the persistent, why can't we? Or can we do this instead? More. Yeah.
Are you familiar with any of the cases of the faulty water meters or faulty water meter readings in the city? I understand it's not just a localized problem, but it's more of a nationwide problem. And the stance that the city takes and any litigation takes, including an ombudsman, not really one to get involved because it is the city.
Yeah, I'm not. I've heard a little bit about what you're talking about, and I've had.
Well, they're very egregious cases where, you know, an older retired couple was supposedly using enough water that an entire apartment complex would be brought.
Yeah, you'll get situations where there's a glitch or malfunction. I mean, it happens, and so then you have to have the discussion about whether or not we can modify that. Or whether there's, you know, when you get into zoning issues, you've got the Board of Zoning Appeals. And same deal, if you can articulate a reasonable basis that's supported by your own experts, there will be an avenue. Again, it gets back to, they're not necessarily going to roll over because they have a duty to all of the citizens to keep things in a certain line, but it can be accomplished. Now, when you take tort claims to the city, they always deny those at first because then it gets referred to insurance. So when you see these articles, city council denied somebody, you know, who fell down and hurt their nose really badly on a broken up sidewalk. Well, they always deny those to start with because that is the step that gets them to the insurance. And it doesn't, as you've seen lately, there have been lots of publicized settlements about claims have been brought against the city, the police department, other things. It's not that they're impossible, it's that they do take a lot of time, and sometimes the claim is not large enough to warrant the freight of litigation, but it can be done. That would be the kind of thing that legal aid might take on something like that. Again, that gets into a housing issue, but usually there are ways to extrapolate usage, or where I've had it come up is where there really was a problem and tenants didn't report it. You know, we had toilets that were running all the time, or we had a water line that was broken somewhere. Nobody reported it, nobody caught it, and then down the road it's like, oh no. Yes?
Just a quick comment. Again, the only thing that served, and I called the city on the person's behalf, since it was an elderly person, the only thing that ended up being of any assistance whatsoever was get a local news channel.
And that sometimes can. They are very responsive. They do not like bad press. I've threatened it. I don't do it very often, but I remember, and it's not just them, I remember when I was a law clerk at a personal injury firm, somebody had found a dead rodent in a bag of potato chips, and the lawyer wrote the petition rhyming to the advertising jingle that company used on television and radio, you know? I mean, it wasn't a big claim, but it was a threat of publicity. And of course now some of that is watered down because we don't have consolidated news sources anymore. And we've got so much social media punching out stuff all the time, and you can't tell what's real and what isn't, so they just drown it out. But yeah, they're very sensitive to public opinion. That's why I say, when you get something like the development down at First and, I can't remember the street, but the Sweat Lodge and Wilderness Park dispute, you know, they're very sensitive to that. I mean, they changed city policy to accommodate sitting on advisory boards and other things because of some of that dispute as to whether that should occur. I mean, we're going into an election year. They will present as if they do care. Shouldn't have said that quite that way, but it's true. All right. One more question. You have two. We'll let you do that.
So, when do we need to meet you? The second question is, if we sign meeting you, there any resources, legal resources that I, as the landlord, can advocate myself to equip to kind of like not have to meet you?
Well, you met me tonight. You know, I'll always get people that call and they think they have to have an appointment. I do business on the phone. I have people that text me. It's not my favorite way. and I have stuff coming in too many different directions, where's Dave Bader? I spent, I'll bet 10 minutes looking for one piece of information you had sent me, but it was on my phone, not on my email. Because you know, too many different things come in too many different ways. But you can call. There are times when we should do an appointment, but you can always call or start with an email. And I always laugh. People will say, I can't get a hold of you. And I'm like, you know, I pay a lot of money to be findable on the internet. I'm not trying to hide. I pay national services so that I'm out there. You can find me. And then, you know, we talk about generally what it might be that we might want to do. And then I figure out, do we need an appointment, or can you email me in the stuff and I'll take a look at it? I get people call all the time. I'm buying a house. I signed the contract. Now I need you to look it over for me. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, if you've already signed it, we're a little behind the curve. But I'm nice about it. And I'll say, sure, I'll look that over. And and they're like, well, do I need to come in? I'm like, you could have the real estate agent email it to me, and I'll take a quick look and see whether or not there's anything I think you should be concerned about. And so, you know, there are lots of ways, and I'll tell you, if it's something that doesn't need legal advice, I will tell you that. If it's something, I like to empower my clients to act on their own. I know they don't need me to do everything for them. And that's not on purpose so they get into trouble and then I can do something else. It just, it came up recently because I have a longtime client, highly successful, highly sophisticated in real estate, and I've got a retired district court judge who's buying a piece of property from him, who used to be in private practice before he went on the bench, but now he's not anymore. And so a couple months ago, he shows up at eviction court, and he doesn't know how to do an eviction, because he's been a district court judge, not county court. And he's freaking out, and I'm laughing. I'm going, well, it'll be okay. And pretty soon here comes a judge, because two of the judges were sick, and she was going to fill in. She wasn't sure she remembered how to do it, and I'm just laughing at all of them. We'll figure it out, you guys. It's okay. And then she comes and gets me afterwards. She's going, it's not very often you have a judge in front of you. And then he calls me, and he's like, you know, it's a lot harder what you guys do than it is sitting on the bench. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But he wanted to know whether he could talk to my client directly, and I'm just laughing. I'm like, yes, of course you can. Just, it's fine. You guys are the ones buying and selling each other's property. You don't need me. You're a judge. He's worth billions. You know, you don't need me in the middle of this to figure out how we get in so we can do a due diligence inspection. But you can, you know, I will tell you, if there are times when you need lawyers, I will tell you need a lawyer. Don't try to do it on your own. The eviction stuff, you do not try to do on your own anymore, because the tenant defense team will take advantage of that, and they will just frustrate everybody. And they're less likely to do that with attorneys. Also, if you have your property in an LLC, you're required to have a lawyer. You can't represent your own LLC. You can only appear on things you individually own on your own. Does that get you? Okay. Thank you for having me tonight.